Look, reader, the most feared gangster America ever made wasn't dropped by a rival's gun. They stamped his papers and mailed him out of the country like a parcel. This clipping waited years for the front page, but it can hold a night longer. First, how a street kid built an empire no bullet could reach. They'll tell you Lucky Luciano fell the way his kind always falls. A gang war, a hail of lead in a doorway. Wrong. So here's the question you stayed for. How do you topple a man no bullet, no rival, no cop could touch? You don't shoot him, you outread him. Watch The Quiet Men. Rewind, 1906. A boy comes off a boat from Sicily into the Lower East Side. Salvatore Lucania, 9 years old. 10 to a room, coal smoke, a language he can't read. A kid like that could have been anything. This one went hunting the shortest road up. Off the boat, empty pockets, sharp eyes. First, today's rate, my favorite column. His first honest wage, about $7 a week shipping hats. Call it $200 today, roughly. A week's board and a pair of shoes, no more. He looked at that pay envelope, then at the dice game on the corner, did the arithmetic, and threw the envelope over. The corner schooled him faster than any classroom. Dice, numbers, muscle for older men who ran the games. He read a card table the way you read a face. Who's bluffing, who's about to break. Somewhere in there, the name stuck. Lucky. Not luck. He simply knew which cards to hold and which men to fold. Now meet the man he worked under. Downtown sat a fat old king of the rackets, ate like a Roman, trusted no one, ran beer and dice by the pound. He never looked twice at the lean young dealer at his own card table. Old kings never do. They called that boss Joe the Boss, Masseria. But the kid had a teacher the old king lacked. A silver-haired gambler who dressed like a banker taught him the real secret. The loud ones die young. The quiet ones own the city. Learn the numbers. Wear gray. Let the other man reach first. Lucky listened. He always listened. By the early 30s, Lucky had graduated. And here's a thing to hold on to. In a Waldorf tower suite, the emperor of the streets signed the register under a soft clerk's name, Charles Ross. Freeze the frame. Remember that name, reader, Charles Ross. Why it matters stays under my hat, and the truth in this town comes out small first. Buried on page 14, 6-point type, a line no emperor bothers to read. In this state, no man sits above the law, not the mayor, not the king of the rackets. Lucky read his own headlines. He never read page 14. Small print keeps its own calendar. Clipping 1, 1930. The 5 families go to war. 2 old kings, Masseria downtown, a newcomer uptown, went for each other's throats over the only crown. For a year, the city counted bodies in doorways. Both wanted Lucky's guns. He wanted the crown itself melted down for scrap. Spring 31, Coney Island. Lucky walks the old boss into a long lunch and a friendly game of cards. Hours in, he lays down his hand and steps to the washroom. The door opens behind him. When it's over, the chair sits empty, the cards face down, a hat on the floor. The war ended at that table. Overnight, Lucky is the most useful man in New York. He hands the war to the uptown king wrapped in a bow. Your side won, boss, and takes the seat at his right hand. The city thinks it's over. Only Lucky knows better. He had traded one old king for another. He didn't plan to keep this one. Clipping 231. A new boss of all bosses crowns himself. The uptown winner lines the families up, hands out territory, and hands himself a grand title out of ancient Rome. Boss of all bosses. He even drew up rules, and on one list in his own hand sat the next name to erase, Lucky's. They called him Maranzano, but Lucky read that list first. September 31. 4 men in suits walk into the boss of bosses' office flashing badges. Taxmen, they say, here for the books. Maranzano waves them in. He'd feared a bullet from the street, never a badge at his own door. Minutes later, the office goes quiet. 2 kings dead in 5 months, and Lucky doesn't reach for the empty crown. Watch this, he melted down. No more boss of all bosses. Instead, a board. The 5 families around one table, votes, territories, a court to settle blood before it spills. He called it the Commission, the mob as a corporation. Now the money. Hold on to something. By some estimates, the rackets under that table threw off millions a year. Today, tens of millions. Lucky ran it from a Waldorf tower, $800 a month for the suite, when a working man's whole month ran 70. The emperor tipped more than most men earned. Clipping 334. The untouchable Mr. Luciano. He owns the night now. Judges take his calls, cops work his door, the smart papers spell his name with respect. On paper, though, he's a gambler. No job, no income, not a dollar with his name on it. Reader, try pinning a charge on a man who doesn't exist, and Lucky wore it well. No loud diamonds, no furs, just the gray suits his old teacher swore by, and that half-lidded eye that never blinked first. Ask him what he was, and he'd shrug. A businessman, that's all. And the trouble with a businessman above the law keeps its own count, and it was counting his. Turn the page. Downtown, in a plain government office, a young man sat reading. Thin, mustached, a special prosecutor most of the city couldn't have named, turned loose on the rackets on a government salary. No informer, no gun, no army. Only paper and a stubborn faith in small print. The city barely knew his name, Dewey. Here's the second time the truth hid in small print. The day they gave that prosecutor the rackets beat, it ran on page 14. One paragraph, 6-point type, under the ball scores. The emperor's people clipped it and laughed. A schoolboy with subpoenas against the commission. Lucky never gave it a second read. 2 lines that would end an empire. About that winter, my clippings go quiet. A desk, a lamp, a wall of paper on a man who didn't exist on paper. Witnesses forgot their own names by morning. Every door in the city bolted from the inside. The charge against Lucky Luciano wasn't weak. There was no charge at all. Night after night, the same wall of paper. The emperor slept in a tower. The prosecutor slept at his desk. Nothing the state had would hold a man who paid cash and signed nothing. But paper remembers what men forget. Every dollar leaves a footprint. Somewhere in that wall, a footprint had a name. Then the wall cracked. Not from the top, from the bottom. The clerks and bookers who ran the rackets day to day could be found, subpoenaed, put under oath one by one. Small people the emperor never bothered to hide. Dewey stopped hunting the king. He started counting the king's clerks. And every emperor leaves one careless thread. Remember the Waldorf, reader? The tower suite, the clerk's name? A grand jury pulled the hotel's register. Month after month, a gambler with no income paying a king's rent under a made-up name. Charles Ross. The man who didn't exist had signed his own bill for years. And who was closing on the emperor of the underworld? A salaried lawyer who rode the subway home. No cut, no kickback, no diamond. A government paycheck and a wife who kept his dinner warm while he read. The whole city had money on the king. One quiet clerk of the law bet on the paper. You know who I'm pulling for. May 36. Lucky Luciano walks into a New York courtroom the way he walks into a nightclub. Pressed gray suit, easy smile, sure the state can no more hold him than a bullet could. 62 counts waited on the table. Beside them, a tall stack of other men's paper with his made-up name all through it. The prosecution lays it out slow, the way Lucky once read a card table. And in this room, the gray suit doesn't count. Here, they count the paper. You remember the name Charles Ross? Dewey sets the hotel register on the table beside the emperor who swore he was nobody. The bill, the name, the years, his own hand. This just in. The whole city's talking. June 36. The jury files out at 4 in the morning. The room holds its breath. Guilty on 62 counts. 30 to 50 years, a sentence no gangster in this country had ever drawn. That small print off page 14 is the front page now. The front page holds no longer. Today's rate, the last one, and what a number. The papers put his bail alone at $350,000, highest the state had ever set, roughly $7 million today. Counted in those $7 honest weeks the kid threw away, 50,000 of them. Near 1,000 years of straight work just to make bail. He didn't. They took the emperor upstate to a prison in the pines the Khans called Siberia, and the empire didn't wait for him. Clubs, wire rooms, tables. The machine ran on without its maker, and every rival he'd outread slid into his chair. A man can build a throne too well, build it to outlast anyone, and it outlasts you. Seemed like the end of the reel. But there's a late addition, the strangest turn in the whole story. A war came, and from his cell the emperor did the government a quiet favor or two. The papers stayed sealed for years, and when the guns went silent, someone very familiar had the power to open his door. 1946, a cold Brooklyn pier. They don't free Lucky Luciano, they deport him. Parole on one condition, a one-way boat to Italy and never America again. And the man who signed that release, the governor of New York, Thomas Dewey, the same prosecutor who had caged him 10 years before, now pointed at the water. Remember how he opened? The most feared man in America, mailed out like a parcel? Here's the postage. One deportation stamp, one gangplank, one tug hauling the boat toward open water. The emperor of the American underworld watched the only country he ever ran shrink to a smudge. He never touched it again. Say this for Lucky Luciano, and I'll say it once. The man could see 10 years down a road nobody had paved, and built for a future the old kings couldn't picture. He just built it on the wrong side of the law. The commission he dreamed up outlived him by half a century. Vision like that? Wasted on a throne of smoke. Here's the chronicler's verdict. Then the number's yours. He built a throne no bullet could reach. A republic reached it with a subpoena and a boat ticket. The biggest crown this town ever saw still fit under one deportation stamp. Luciano died in exile in '62, ran America, never once let back in. Justice came late. It came by paper. Fresh ink dries, reader. A deportation stamp never washes off. One street kid built the machine that ran American crime for 50 years and couldn't buy a ticket home. In the next edition, a bootleg queen who out-earned every man in her town and the one notebook she should have burned. Tell me in the comments, where could Lucky still have been stopped? The first shortcut or never? Every answer goes in the set. Subscribe, your copy's on the press. This edition is put to bed.